It was supposed to be just another routine flight, but for Dave, it quickly turned into an encounter he would never forget. Dave had just boarded the luxurious first-class cabin of a plane, ready to settle in for a smooth ride to a business meeting he had been preparing for all week. He was a successful corporate guy, well-dressed, and carrying the kind of air of confidence that often accompanies someone used to the high life. After settling into a seat and getting comfortable, he glanced around the cabin, observing the other passengers, who were equally well-dressed and relaxed. Everything seemed normal, until he noticed a man sitting beside him. This man, who was seated by the window, didn't look anything like the typical first-class passenger. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or carrying a designer briefcase. Instead, he wore a simple, dark hoodie with the hood pulled over his head, paired with jeans and a pair of sunglasses that seemed a little out of place indoors. His face was partially obscured by his book, but there was something familiar about the way he carried himself, an aura of calm that stood in stark contrast to the flashy, businesslike atmosphere around them. Dave's eyes flicked back to the man several times as the plane ascended, but he couldn't place him. At first, Dave didn't think much of it. After all, first-class flights attracted all sorts of people. Perhaps this was just another one of those low-key passengers who enjoyed the luxury of a premium ticket without the fame to match. But as the plane settled into its cruising altitude and the gentle hum of the engines became a comforting background sound, Dave's curiosity began to grow. He found himself repeatedly glancing over at the man beside him, trying to figure out where he had seen him before. Minutes passed, and the nagging feeling didn't subside. It was as though something about this person was nagging at Dave's subconscious, but he still couldn't place it. Had he seen this guy at an event? On TV? In an ad? Dave racked his brain, mentally trying to fit the pieces together. Eventually, the most ridiculous thought crossed his mind. He began to think that the man looked a little like Keanu Reeves, the famous actor from The Matrix. Dave immediately dismissed the thought. No way, he thought to himself. Why would Keanu Reeves be sitting on a plane like this, all dressed down and blending in with the rest of the passengers? It didn't make sense. After all, Keanu was a global superstar. He had every reason to travel in style, with security and media following his every move. The idea seemed absurd, but Dave couldn't shake the feeling. As if guided by some invisible force, he turned to the man sitting next to him with a mischievous grin. "Hey, you look like someone famous," Dave said, nudging the stranger lightly. His voice carried the confidence of someone who believed they were about to make a funny, harmless observation. The man looked up slowly from his book, his face still partially hidden by his sunglasses. He gave Dave a small, neutral smile, the kind of smile that didn't reveal much, but still carried a sense of kindness. "Do I?" the man asked simply, his voice calm, betraying no hint of recognition. Without waiting for a real answer, Dave leaned in slightly, his grin widening. "Yeah, you remind me of that guy from The Matrix," Dave said, pointing toward the man's face. "What's his name? Neo, right? Keanu Reeves." Dave chuckled to himself, feeling smug. He thought he had nailed it. It wasn't every day you saw someone who looked like a famous actor, especially on a flight. It's honestly kind of funny that someone like you is flying first class. What's next? An acting gig in a cheesy movie? At that point, Dave had no idea what he was dealing with. He figured it was just a lucky guess, an innocent observation. He thought he was just talking to some guy who had a passing resemblance to a famous person. What's the harm in poking a little fun? But he didn't realize that Keanu Reeves, yes, the real Keanu Reeves, was sitting right next to him, completely unfazed by the playful banter. Keanu's eyes shifted slightly as he registered the remark. He didn't immediately respond, but there was a subtle shift in his posture. He didn't seem upset, but there was something about his silence that made Dave's grin falter just a little. Keanu remained calm and collected, his expression still neutral, but perhaps tinged with a hint of amusement. Instead of reacting defensively, Keanu simply nodded, his demeanor surprisingly unbothered. "I see," Keanu replied, his voice soft yet steady. "Well, I guess that happens sometimes." For a moment, there was an uncomfortable silence between them. Dave, now feeling a bit embarrassed but still thinking he was just engaging in some harmless fun, chuckled awkwardly and waited for the conversation to continue. But Keanu, ever the humble man, did not offer any more details. He simply returned to his book, as if Dave's comment had not fazed him in the least. Dave, however, had no idea that his teasing was about to take an unexpected turn. In his mind, he had scored a small victory by identifying the resemblance, and now he was feeling even more relaxed. But little did he know that his carelessness was about to unravel in the most surprising way. Keanu, as always, was patient, humble, and calm in the face of Dave's misguided words. But this flight, and the truth about the man sitting next to him, was about to become the most unforgettable part of Dave's journey. Dave, now feeling even more in control of the situation, couldn't resist pushing the envelope further. He had made his assumption, and he was determined to have the last word. Keanu, in his mind, was just some washed-up actor from the 90s who had faded into the background of Hollywood. Dave, confident in his casual superiority, decided to throw out a few more jabs. "So, do you still do those lame action films?" Dave continued, leaning back in his seat, completely unaware of how far he was pushing his luck. "I bet the Matrix fans would be shocked to see you sitting here in coach with the rest of us regular folks. You're not really living up to your star status, huh?" He said it all with a casual laugh, expecting a defensive reaction from Keanu, maybe even a comeback or a sharp reply. Instead, Keanu didn't flinch. He just kept his calm demeanor, his eyes soft and thoughtful, yet resolute, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. For a brief moment, Dave thought he had successfully ruffled the actor's feathers. He couldn't help but smirk at his own wit, convinced that Keanu was just another celebrity who couldn't handle a bit of teasing. The flight continued on its steady course, and as the minutes passed, Dave felt his confidence growing. The cabin was quiet, with most passengers minding their own business. Keanu was still reading his book, seemingly unaffected by the remarks Dave had made. But there was something unsettling about the way Keanu carried himself, a quiet strength that Dave couldn't quite put his finger on. It felt almost humbling. Dave was about to deliver another snarky comment, but before he could open his mouth, Keanu surprised him with a simple question. "Do you know who I am?" Keanu asked, his voice still calm but with a subtle shift, a tone that was polite yet layered with an unexpected challenge. Dave, taken off guard for a split second, chuckled nervously. He assumed Keanu was just being defensive. Maybe the actor was embarrassed or frustrated by the jabs, but Dave was still sure of his superiority. After all, Keanu had barely said anything to defend himself, and he still hadn't confirmed if he was actually the actor Dave thought he was. Yeah, Dave responded, waving his hand dismissively. "You're Keanu Reeves, the guy who was famous back in the 90s. Can't say I'm a big fan, though. Your movies never really appealed to me." Dave's voice was full of nonchalance, as if he was explaining something simple and trivial. Keanu's expression didn't change. His face remained as calm as ever, almost like he was letting Dave think he had won. But Dave couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a weight to the air between them, an invisible tension that Dave didn't fully comprehend. Keanu's response didn't carry the irritation Dave expected. Instead, it was measured, deliberate, and, perhaps most unnerving of all, calm. Keanu's voice was steady when he replied. "Well, it's not about being a fan," he said, his tone even but carrying a subtle weight that Dave hadn't anticipated. "But you might want to know that your words can carry a lot of impact, especially when you're talking about someone who lives with humility." For a brief moment, Dave felt a strange unease settle in his stomach. It wasn't the typical defensive response that he was used to hearing from celebrities. It wasn't an angry retort or a sarcastic quip. No, Keanu's words were like a gentle reminder, an almost philosophical statement about the consequences of one's actions and words. The calmness in Keanu's tone felt like a quiet challenge, and it made Dave pause. He looked at Keanu, the man's expression still unflinching, as if he were waiting for Dave to process the gravity of his words. But Dave, who had been riding high on his confident teasing, didn't quite know how to respond. He brushed off the unease, thinking that Keanu was simply being defensive, trying to reclaim some dignity. After all, why would Keanu Reeves, famous for his roles in The Matrix and John Wick, need to care about a regular guy like him making a few harmless jokes? So, Dave did what any man in his position would do. He shrugged it off, assuming the moment would pass without much consequence. He tried to dismiss the unease growing in his chest, but there was something about the way Keanu had spoken that had struck a chord with him. Dave, still not fully understanding the weight of the situation, let out a nervous laugh and tried to regain control. "Come on, man, I was just joking. I didn't mean any harm," he said, attempting to downplay the tension. He looked around the cabin to reassure himself, and when he saw that no one else was paying attention, he relaxed a little. But Keanu's words echoed in Dave's mind. "Your words can carry a lot of impact." He repeated the phrase to himself, only now realizing that it wasn't just a casual comment. Keanu wasn't talking about movies or fame. He was talking about something deeper. For a brief moment, Dave was left speechless, unsure of how to proceed. He thought about his behavior, about how quickly he had judged and mocked someone based on assumptions. The unease in his stomach grew heavier, but before he could process it further, Keanu had already returned to his book, his expression unreadable, as if the conversation had never even happened. The plane continued its course, but for Dave, everything had changed in that moment. He had learned something that would linger in his mind long after the flight ended. Sometimes, it's not the loudest or most offensive response that carries the most weight. It's the calm and thoughtful ones, the ones that make you question your actions. Keanu, as always, had remained humble, but his words had struck deeper than any insult or comeback ever could. Dave didn't know it yet, but he was about to experience a shift in perspective that would change the way he viewed not just celebrities, but the power of his own words. The silence that followed was thick and awkward, hanging between the two men like an unspoken tension. Dave, still feeling confident in his previous jabs, tried to shake off the strange feeling that had started to grow inside him. He figured it was nothing more than a brief moment of discomfort. After all, he was just having a little fun, right? No harm done. At least, that's what he thought. Keanu, however, remained calm and composed, as if completely unaffected by Dave's words. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small folder. The moment was almost surreal, like something out of a movie. Dave watched intently, trying to piece together what was happening. He assumed Keanu was going to ignore him entirely, or maybe even walk away. But what happened next caught him completely off guard. Keanu carefully opened the folder and flipped through the pages, his movements deliberate. He turned the page slowly, revealing something that looked like a script. Not just any script, though, a script for a movie. Dave watched, his curiosity piqued for the first time during the entire exchange. Was this some kind of gag? Was Keanu pulling out a random script to mess with him? But no, this wasn't a joke. This was real. Keanu casually glanced up from the script, his gaze soft and steady, and then said something that caught Dave completely off guard. "I just finished filming a new project. A groundbreaking film, actually. It's going to hit theaters worldwide soon." Dave blinked. He was still processing the fact that the man sitting next to him was Keanu Reeves, the very actor he had been mocking only moments ago. It was as if the words Keanu had spoken didn't fully register in his brain. Groundbreaking? Worldwide? Keanu had a new movie coming out. "Okay, great," Dave finally said, his voice lacking the usual confidence. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some composure. "What's it about? Another Matrix knockoff?" Dave tried to sound dismissive, though his words felt hollow now. A little more awkward than he intended. He couldn't help but chuckle nervously. He didn't expect the conversation to turn into a serious discussion about film, but somehow it had. Keanu looked up at him with a small smile, his eyes warm yet thoughtful. His gaze softened, not in a condescending way, but in a way that made Dave feel like he had just said something unintentionally wrong. "Actually, no," Keanu replied, his voice steady and calm. "It's a story that's very close to my heart. It's about human connection, love, and the struggles that come with it. Unlike most of the flashy Hollywood productions, it's a deeply personal story." For the first time, Dave's smug demeanor faltered. He had expected Keanu to brush him off or even become defensive. But Keanu's words weren't just a response. They were a window into something deeper, a glimpse into the kind of work that went beyond big-budget action movies and flashy Hollywood fame. Dave felt a slight sting of embarrassment. It was as if Keanu had turned the conversation into something meaningful, and Dave hadn't been prepared for it. His words from earlier now seemed hollow, and he couldn't help but feel the weight of what he had said. But instead of acknowledging the discomfort, he doubled down, trying to recover some dignity in front of this man he had so flippantly insulted. "Right, well, I guess good luck with that. If anyone still cares about your work," Dave said, his voice tinged with forced bravado. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't react to the jab at all, as if he hadn't heard it. He just looked at Dave with that same calm demeanor, his expression unchanged. Keanu wasn't going to engage in a petty back and forth, and it was clear that he was not concerned with defending himself. Instead, he simply closed the script and gently placed it back into his bag, as if the conversation had already moved past the point of needing any further explanation. It was in that quiet moment that Dave felt a shift, a realization that he had just been schooled by a man who didn't need to say much to make his point. Keanu stood up, moving with a calm confidence that Dave couldn't ignore. Just then, the flight attendant walked by, and Keanu addressed her in the same relaxed manner. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite yet firm. "Is there any way I can speak with the captain?" Dave sat back, his mind racing as he watched Keanu walk toward the front of the cabin. The casualness of the request and the way Keanu moved through the space felt so natural, so effortless, as if he wasn't just a movie star, but someone who truly didn't care about the fame or the attention. Dave's mind was spinning. He had no idea what was happening, but he could feel the weight of the earlier conversation, the realization that he had made a fool of himself, and the sudden understanding that Keanu Reeves, the man he had mocked, wasn't just another Hollywood celebrity. He was humble, grounded, and unbothered by petty insults. It wasn't about the fame or the accolades for Keanu. It was about something deeper, something that Dave was just beginning to grasp. As Keanu reached the front of the cabin, Dave remained in his seat, unsure of what to do. He watched as Keanu exchanged a few words with the flight attendant and made his way to the cockpit. Dave, still processing the encounter, felt a wave of regret. The snide remarks that had seemed so easy to throw out now felt like they were hanging over him, like a cloud he couldn't shake. He had just made the biggest mistake of his flight, and maybe his life. Keanu's calm and measured response had been a lesson Dave never expected to learn. Sometimes, humility speaks louder than any words of defense. As the plane began its descent and the familiar rumble of the engines reverberated through the cabin, a calm voice came over the intercom, signaling the approach of the flight's end. It was the captain's voice, but this time, it wasn't just a routine announcement about seat belts or expected arrival time. This was something different, something that would change Dave's perception forever. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting passenger with us today," the captain began, his voice full of enthusiasm. "You may have already guessed it, but the person seated in 2A is none other than Keanu Reeves, the Hollywood legend who's currently working on his latest project, a film that will challenge everything you think you know about modern cinema." For a split second, Dave thought he must have misheard. The name Keanu Reeves echoed in his mind, but surely the captain couldn't be talking about the same man. The man sitting next to him? The one he had been mocking earlier? It couldn't be true. But then it hit him. Hard. Dave's face drained of color. His stomach dropped as the captain continued to speak, detailing Keanu's remarkable career and his upcoming film projects that were said to push boundaries and offer a fresh perspective on the movie industry. The captain spoke with genuine admiration and respect, recounting Keanu's legacy, from his iconic roles in The Matrix and John Wick to his well-known reputation for being one of the most humble and grounded actors in Hollywood. The announcement reverberated in Dave's ears as his mind went into overdrive. He looked around the cabin at the other passengers, their faces reflecting a mix of awe and disbelief. Some whispered excitedly to each other, clearly recognizing the significance of the moment. Dave, meanwhile, sat frozen in his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe what he had just heard. His mind flashed back to the earlier part of the flight, to the words he had carelessly thrown at the man sitting next to him. Keanu Reeves? More like a has-been, he had thought. What's he doing sitting here with regular people, flying in first class? He had mocked the very person who was now the subject of the captain's praise. Dave had called Keanu's iconic roles lame, questioning if anyone still cared about his acting. He had joked about how Keanu wasn't living up to his star status, a comment that, in hindsight, seemed incredibly rude and out of place. As the reality of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks, Dave's jaw dropped. His mind raced, replaying each and every word he had said, each taunt and dismissive remark. What had he been thinking? How could he have been so blind, so ignorant? The very person he had mocked for being washed up and irrelevant was not just any actor. He was Keanu Reeves, a man who had achieved incredible success while maintaining a level of humility and kindness that most people could only dream of. And yet, here was Dave, sitting next to him, spewing hurtful comments about a man who didn't deserve a single one of them. Dave's face flushed with embarrassment as his earlier words rang louder in his mind. "Do you still do those lame action films?" he had asked. "What's next? Another Matrix knockoff?" He could feel the sting of those words now, knowing how hurtful and uncalled for they had been. Keanu had taken it all in stride, responding with nothing more than patience and grace. He hadn't fought back, hadn't tried to defend himself, and certainly hadn't shown any hint of the ego or arrogance that Dave had expected from a star of his caliber. Instead, he had been kind, humble, and far more composed than Dave could ever hope to be. The realization settled over him, heavy and suffocating. Dave hadn't just insulted a stranger. He had insulted someone who had spent decades contributing to the world in a meaningful way. A man who, despite his fame, was still grounded and aware of the impact of his words and actions. And now, as the truth was laid bare for all to see, Dave had no choice but to face the consequences of his ignorance. He glanced around again, his eyes meeting those of the other passengers, most of whom were now staring at him, some with knowing smiles, others with a look of disbelief. It felt like all eyes were on him. He had made himself the fool, and the worst part was that he had done it to someone who didn't deserve it. The captain's voice continued, detailing Keanu's upcoming film, the heartfelt and personal nature of the project, and how it would challenge perceptions of modern cinema. Dave couldn't focus on the words anymore. His thoughts were consumed with regret. He had belittled a man who had built an empire of respect and admiration, and now he had to live with the knowledge that his words had been cruel, thoughtless, and completely unfounded. The more Dave thought about it, the worse it became. How had he let his assumptions get the best of him? Why had he felt the need to prove himself, to take shots at someone who didn't deserve any of it? He had tried to be funny, to impress the people around him with his wit, but in the process, he had lost sight of the most important thing: respect for others. Dave sat back in his seat, feeling small and insignificant, his mind racing as he waited for the plane to land. He knew he needed to apologize, to make things right with Keanu. But how could he? The words didn't seem enough. There was no way to undo the damage he had done with his careless remarks. But he had to try. He had to at least acknowledge his mistake, even if Keanu had already forgiven him in the quietest, most graceful way possible. As the plane touched down and the seatbelt sign turned off, Dave sat there for a moment longer, his hands shaking slightly as he reflected on the lesson he had just learned. This wasn't just about making a fool of himself in front of a celebrity. It was about the power of words and the importance of humility. And Dave knew, from this moment forward, he would never make the mistake of judging someone based on assumptions again. Dave sat there in complete silence, his mind racing as the reality of his mistake fully settled in. He had made a fool of himself, and now, in the quiet aftermath, he couldn't escape the gravity of what he had done. His thoughts turned inward, reflecting on his behavior, his arrogance, and the hurt he had caused. He thought about his family. How would they view him if they knew how he had acted? He imagined his friends, many of whom shared similar senses of humor, and wondered how they would feel if they knew he had belittled someone so kind, so humble. But more than anything, he thought about Keanu. Here was a man who had built a career on not just incredible talent, but on a foundation of kindness, humility, and patience. Keanu was no ordinary celebrity. He wasn't a person who thrived on controversy, drama, or the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. He had experienced his own share of struggles and heartbreak, personal losses, financial struggles, and the toll of public scrutiny. And yet, he had risen above it all with a level of grace and dignity that most people could only dream of. The man sitting beside Dave on the plane wasn't just a Hollywood legend. He was a reminder that true greatness wasn't measured by fame or fortune. It was about character, about how one carried themselves in the face of adversity. And Dave, for all his success and confidence, had shown a complete lack of character in that moment. He had been quick to judge, quick to make assumptions, and quick to tear down a person he had not even bothered to understand. As the flight descended, Dave sat still, his heart heavy with regret. The captain's announcement had been the final blow, shattering the illusion Dave had built up in his mind about the situation. Keanu was not just another out-of-touch celebrity. He was someone who had earned the respect of millions, not because of his fame, but because of his character. Dave had assumed he could make light of a person he barely knew, but now he realized how deeply he had hurt someone who didn't deserve it. As the plane landed and the seatbelt sign was turned off, passengers began to gather their belongings, preparing to disembark. Dave hesitated. He could feel the awkwardness in the air, and his thoughts scrambled as he wondered how he would face Keanu. How could he possibly apologize for something as careless and thoughtless as what he had said? Would Keanu even care? Would he be angry? Would he brush it off and walk away? The fear of rejection and embarrassment weighed heavily on Dave's shoulders. But deep down, he knew he had to make things right. He stood up slowly, trying to steady his nerves, and made his way toward Keanu, who was quietly gathering his things. Keanu didn't seem angry or upset. He was just the same calm, composed man he had been all along. Dave stood there for a moment, unsure of how to approach. He had no script, no clever lines, just the raw truth of his mistake. He couldn't hide from it any longer. "Keanu," Dave began, his voice shaky but sincere. "I just want to apologize for what I said earlier. I didn't know who you were. I didn't realize who I was sitting next to. I was rude, and I said things I shouldn't have. I'm really sorry for being so thoughtless." Keanu looked up at him, his expression warm and understanding. A smile tugged at the corners of his lips, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "There's nothing to forgive," Keanu said, his voice calm and soothing. "But just remember, we all make mistakes. What's important is how we learn from them." The simplicity and grace of Keanu's response left Dave momentarily speechless. He had braced himself for anger or a cold dismissal, but instead, he was met with something far more powerful: understanding and compassion. Keanu didn't hold a grudge. He didn't point fingers or dwell on the past. He simply offered a gentle reminder that mistakes were a part of life, but the most important thing was how one handled them afterward. Dave nodded, his throat tight with emotion. The kindness Keanu had shown him was beyond anything he had expected. He was humbled by the actor's response, by the way he had refused to let Dave's earlier behavior define him, or even affect him in the slightest. It wasn't just that Keanu had forgiven him. It was that Keanu had done so with such ease, such quiet dignity. It was a lesson Dave would carry with him forever. As Dave walked off the plane, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but there was something else lingering in the back of his mind, a newfound understanding of the power of words. It wasn't just about saying sorry when you made a mistake. It was about being aware of the impact your words could have, about treating others with kindness, regardless of who they were or where they came from. Keanu had shown him that true strength lay in humility, in the ability to rise above judgment and hurtful comments, and to respond with grace and patience. This encounter, though awkward and uncomfortable for Dave at the time, turned out to be one of the most valuable lessons of his life. He had learned the importance of humility, of treating others with respect, and of recognizing that no one, no matter how famous or successful, deserved to be belittled or judged. And as for Keanu, he had proven, once again, that kindness and humility are the true marks of a legend. Dave would never forget that flight, or the lesson it had taught him. From that day forward, he carried with him the reminder that words had power, and that the true measure of a person was not in their fame or status, but in the way they treated others. And for that, he would always be grateful to Keanu.